Hey guys, today I'm going to teach a lesson on runtime complexity of computer programs. I recommend this lesson to anybody who's taking data structures or anybody who is looking to get an interview or an internship at a technology company. So let's get started. So, first off, what is runtime complexity and what does it mean and why is it important? So, runtime complexity by definition, is the amount of time it takes for your program to run based on an arbitrary number of input. And it is the worst case scenario for an arbitrary number of input. For example, if you have an array that is length 10 and you loop through every single iteration of the array or every single element of the array, for example, you're trying to find an element. If that element is the first item, you would get it in one try, but the worst case scenario would be 10 tries because that's the last element of the array. Well, we would call that O of n runtime complexity. What does that mean? That means that for a size n, it will take exactly n iterations for you to find the answer to the problem because the size is 10, n is 10 because there are 10 elements in the array, and if you loop through every single iteration, you would wind up with O of n as your runtime complexity. Another example is, let's say you want to see if an element has another element within the same array. Well, this is a little bit trickier. You can't just loop through the array one time. At least we need special ways to do that. And a very easy way to find the second element is to loop through the array in O of n squared runtime complexity. The reason for this is because at each iteration of the array, or each element of the array, you want to loop through the entire array and see if there is a matching element. As you can see in the code here, what we are supposed to do in this problem is see if an array contains two elements that are the same, if an element of the array contains a duplicate item. And as you see, I have a for loop and then another nested for loop. Using the example from before, if nums.length, if there are 10 elements in our array, then as you see, we loop through the array 10 times, and at each iteration, at each element of the array, we will loop through the array again 10 times. So how many times will the program run in the worst case scenario? Okay, hope you got an answer. The answer is 100 because if the element is the last one and the other element is the second to last one, then 100 would be the worst runtime complexity you could have. And either you would return true or false, but it may not seem like a big deal if it takes 10 times or 100 times because, well, your computers can run much faster than that. But when we look at big data sets that big tech companies may use, such as Facebook, Instagram, or any other companies that use big databases with millions of users, you can tell if you have a million elements in the array and you run through it in O of n squared time, how many iterations is your program going to complete in its worst case scenario? Be a million squared, which would be a trillion, not what we're looking for. So, how can we improve upon this and how can we use runtime complexity to solve this problem? Well, we can look at another problem that is very similar and we will try to improve upon this runtime complexity. So, an example of this is, let's say Instagram is trying to see if there is a duplicate account in their database, and their database is stored as an array, and there are 1 million users. Well, in that case, the way we did it before, it would take, at worst case, a trillion iterations. It would take O of n squared runtime complexity. And you can imagine if the database was a billion, like it may be for Instagram, the number would be so high it would never actually be able to search and see if there is a matching identity to yours. Well, obviously Instagram's not going to institute an O of n squared runtime complexity. Let's look at a runtime complexity that might be a lot faster, especially as data sets get large. Here we have the exact same problem, but we implement it in a different way. So, this syntax on line 3, don't worry about it if you haven't learned it. Essentially, it is a set of integers, and you can add to it, and it can see if it contains the same integer in constant time. And it does this using some algorithms and tricks that we do not need to learn quite yet. But just know that this line right here can search its own elements in O of one time in exactly one iteration. So taking that into account, we go to our for loop. Now here we run through the array exactly one time, nums.length. So using our Instagram example, if they run through an array of 1,000,000 users, it will take, at worst case, 1,000,000 loops. And then we can see if the hash set contains a specific element of that array. If it does, great, we return true. And if it doesn't, we add it to the hash set. This works because the hash set can see if it contains the element and exactly O of one constant time, takes exactly one iteration. And as you can see here, using a for loop, we go through it 1,000,000 times. If the nums.length was 1,000,000 and we had a worst case scenario where we did not find a match. Well, in that case, Instagram will be able to run, and this is probably more similar to how they track their or see if there are similar identities for their users, because if you had to wait 1,000,000 times longer, like we did in the other problem, I certainly believe you would not be using Instagram very much. So yeah, I'm glad I could teach you a little bit about runtime complexity. Just to go over it again and review, runtime complexity is about finding, I'd say, an abstract time for your computer to run a program based on an arbitrary number of input. So again, input can be any size, and the greater the input size, the greater the runtime complexity matters. So for your programs that you're currently running, they may not be quite that important, but as you move up in computer science and as you work at companies, they will definitely expect you to know this, and they will want you to create programs that can run much faster and can provide a better experience for their users. This would be the part where I'd ask any questions, and I hope you guys have a good day.